The moment Luca Castellano's fist connected with Marcus's jaw, sending the coward sprawling into the muddy gutter, he knew his carefully controlled world had just shifted forever. What he didn't expect was that the trembling, pregnant woman he'd just defended would become the missing piece of his guarded heart, or that protecting her would cost him everything he'd spent 45 years building. Tell us your city below, then enjoy the story and subscribe for more. Now let's get to the story. But to understand how the most feared crime boss in Chicago came to risk everything for a stranger's dignity, we need to go back to the beginning, to a November evening when cruelty collided with honor, and two broken souls found something worth fighting for. The rain hammered Chicago's South Side with the fury of a judgment day, turning the streets into rivers of regret and broken dreams. Valeria Santos pressed her hand against her swollen belly, feeling her 7-month-old daughter kick restlessly as she hurried down the cracked sidewalk. The thin fabric of her maternity coat did little to protect her from the November cold that cut through her like accusations she'd grown tired of hearing. 25 years old, abandoned, and 3 months behind on rent. This wasn't how she'd imagined her life would unfold. The grocery store manager had let her go that morning, citing budget cuts. But Valeria knew the truth. Her growing belly made customers uncomfortable, reminded them that sometimes life happened to good people in bad circumstances. She clutched the final paycheck in her pocket, knowing it wouldn't be enough. The baby would come soon and she had nowhere safe to deliver her daughter. No family to help, no friends left who answered her calls. Marcus had seen to that when he'd walked out 6 months ago, taking not just his presence but his poisonous words about her character to anyone who would listen. The lights of Castellano's restaurant blazed through the downpour like a beacon of warmth in her increasingly cold world. She'd walked past the elegant Italian establishment countless times, never daring to enter. Tonight, desperate for shelter from both the storm and her circumstances, she hesitated under the red awning. Through the windows, she could see well-dressed patrons enjoying meals that cost more than she'd spent on food in the past month. A different world, one where pregnant women didn't get fired for looking tired, where dignity came with a price tag she couldn't afford. Well, what do we have here? The voice behind her was sickeningly familiar. Valeria turned slowly, her heart sinking, as Marcus Rodriguez stepped out of a black sedan with a blonde woman who couldn't have been older than 21. His expensive suit was tailored perfectly, his smile predatory as he approached. "Marcus?" She kept her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I thought you were in Miami. Business brought me back." His eyes traveled to her belly with disgust. "Jesus, Valeria, you look pathetic, standing out here like a beggar, probably hoping some rich man will take pity on you." The blonde laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Is this the one you told me about? The one who tried to trap you with a pregnancy?" Valeria's cheeks burned. "I never tried to trap anyone. You know that's not true." "What I know," Marcus stepped closer, his breath reeking of expensive whiskey and cheap cologne, "is that you're still trying to ruin my reputation, telling people I'm the father of that mistake you're carrying. She's not a mistake." The words came out stronger than Valeria felt. "And you know you're her father." Marcus's face twisted with rage. He grabbed the cup of muddy water from the gutter beside the restaurant's entrance, water mixed with cigarette butts and city grime, and before Valeria could react, hurled it at her chest. The filthy liquid soaked through her coat, staining her dress, dripping down her legs. The humiliation was worse than the cold, worse than the degradation. The blonde squealed with laughter as Marcus grabbed her hand. "That's what liars deserve," he said, already pulling his new girlfriend toward the warm restaurant. "Next time, maybe you'll think twice about spreading lies about your betters." They disappeared through the restaurant's doors, leaving Valeria standing in the rain, soaked in shame and gutter water, her dignity stripped away in front of anyone who might have witnessed the cruel spectacle. She pressed her hands to her belly, whispering apologies to her unborn daughter for bringing her into a world where such cruelty could exist. But what Valeria didn't know was that someone had been watching, someone whose own code of honor had just been violated by proxy, and who never let such insults stand unanswered. Luca Castellano had built his empire on 3 principles: respect, loyalty, and the understanding that some lines should never be crossed. At 45, his salt and pepper hair and the scars that marked his hands told stories of a man who'd earned his position through intelligence, strategic thinking, and, when necessary, decisive action that left no room for interpretation. He'd been concluding a business dinner with his consigliere, Marco Vitale, when the commotion outside caught his attention. Through the restaurant's main window, he watched the scene unfold with growing anger that settled like ice in his chest. A pregnant woman, clearly struggling, humiliated by a coward who lacked the most basic human decency. The man's expensive suit couldn't hide what he truly was: weak, entitled, the kind of person who kicked those already down because it was safe. "Capo," Marco said quietly, noticing Luca's change in expression. "Should I handle this?" Luca was already standing, his decision made. "This one's mine." He walked through the restaurant with measured steps, his presence causing conversations to quiet and staff to move aside. The hostess held the door open without being asked. She knew that look, had seen it before when her boss encountered something that offended his sense of order. The pregnant woman stood motionless in the rain, filthy water dripping from her clothes, her entire body radiating a kind of dignified defeat that made Luca's jaw clench. She was beautiful despite her circumstances, with smooth dark skin and eyes that held strength even in their current pain. More importantly, she was carrying a child, which in Luca's world meant she deserved protection, not persecution. Marcus and his companion had barely made it through the restaurant's entrance when Luca's hand landed on the younger man's shoulder with enough force to make him stumble. "Excuse me." Luca's voice was soft, controlled, which anyone who knew him recognized as far more dangerous than shouting. "I believe you dropped something outside." Marcus turned, irritation flashing across his face before recognition dawned. Every person with connections to Chicago's power structures knew Luca Castellano's face, even if they pretended not to. "Mr. Castellano," Marcus's voice cracked slightly, "I don't know what you mean. We just came in from the rain." "My mistake." Luca's smile held no warmth. "I thought perhaps you'd accidentally spilled something on that young lady outside. Water from the gutter. Perhaps." The color drained from Marcus's face. Around them, the restaurant had gone completely silent, every patron and staff member sensing the shift in atmosphere that preceded either violence or humiliation. That's my ex-girlfriend," Marcus stammered. "We had a disagreement, but it's personal business." "Personal business." Luca repeated the words as if tasting something unpalatable. "Do you consider it personal business to humiliate a pregnant woman in front of my establishment?" The blonde tugged on Marcus's arm, whispering urgently that they should leave, but her companion seemed frozen by the predatory stillness in Luca's eyes. "She was lying about me," Marcus said desperately. "Making claims about paternity, trying to ruin my reputation. I just wanted her to stop." Luca's expression didn't change, but every man in his organization would have recognized the danger sign. "And you thought throwing gutter water on her would accomplish this goal?" It was a moment of anger, and of nothing more." "I see." Luca straightened his cufflinks with deliberate care. "Marco?" His consigliere appeared beside him as if materialized from shadow. "Yes, Capo? Please escort Mr. Rodriguez and his companion to their table. I believe they'll be dining elsewhere tonight." It wasn't a suggestion. Two of Luca's men flanked Marcus and the blonde, guiding them toward the exit, with the kind of gentle firmness that brooked no argument. As they reached the door, Luca called out, "Mr. Rodriguez." Marcus turned back, hope flickering in his eyes. "If I ever see you within 10 blocks of this restaurant again, if I hear you've approached that young woman again, if your name crosses my attention for any reason related to her well-being, we'll have a much more personal conversation about respect and consequences." The threat was delivered in the same conversational tone Luca might use to discuss the weather, which made it infinitely more terrifying. Marcus nodded frantically and disappeared into the night, his evening and quite possibly his peace of mind thoroughly ruined. But Luca's work wasn't finished. Outside, a pregnant woman stood in the rain, soaked in shame that didn't belong to her. Valeria had given up trying to clean the muddy water from her coat when the restaurant's door opened behind her. She assumed Marcus had returned to deliver another humiliation, but the footsteps approaching were heavier, more measured. "Miss." The voice was rich, accented with the kind of authority that made people listen. She turned to find a man in his 40s watching her with eyes that seemed to catalogue everything: her soaked condition, the trembling she couldn't quite control, the protective way her hands curved around her belly. He was handsome in a dangerous way, with silver threading through dark hair and the kind of expensive suit that suggested serious money. More concerning were the calluses on his hands and the alertness in his posture that spoke of violence held carefully in check. "I'm fine," she said automatically, the lie falling flat between them. No, he said simply. You're not. He shrugged off his coat, a garment that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and held it out. This will keep you warmer than what you're wearing. Valeria stared at the offered coat, then at him. I can't accept that. It's expensive and I'm... She gestured at her stained clothing. Soaked and cold, he finished. The coat can be cleaned or replaced. You cannot. When she still hesitated, his expression gentled slightly. My name is Luca Castellano. I own the restaurant behind us, and I just had a conversation with the gentleman who threw water on you. He won't be bothering you again. The name meant nothing to her, but something in his manner suggested it should. You didn't need to get involved. This isn't your problem. When someone shows disrespect in front of my establishment, it becomes my problem. He stepped closer, still holding the coat. When a pregnant woman is mistreated for any reason, it becomes every decent man's problem. The simple humanity in his words broke something inside her. She'd been holding herself together through sheer willpower for months, and this stranger's kindness was nearly her undoing. She accepted the coat with trembling fingers, wrapping it around her shoulders. The warmth was immediate, both physical and emotional. Thank you, she whispered. When did you last eat? The question was unexpected, but delivered with the same gentle authority. She couldn't remember. Between losing her job and the stress of the encounter with Marcus, food had seemed unimportant. This morning, I think. Luca's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You're eating now, both of you. His eyes moved to her belly. My chef makes excellent minestrone, and the bread is baked fresh hourly. I can't afford... You're my guest. The words carried finality. When was the last time someone took care of you? The question hit her like a physical blow, bringing tears she'd been fighting for months. The last time someone had cared about her well-being was before Marcus had shown his true colors, before the pregnancy had become an inconvenience, before her world had narrowed to a series of rejections and closed doors. I don't know, she admitted. Luca studied her face, seeing something there that made his expression shift from professional courtesy to something warmer, more personal. Then tonight we change that. Come inside before you catch pneumonia. She wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain what little independence she had left. But her daughter kicked restlessly against her ribs, and the warmth radiating from inside the restaurant was too tempting to resist. I don't even know your last name, Luca said as he guided her toward the entrance. Santos. Valeria Santos. Valeria. He tested the name as he opened the door. Beautiful. Italian. Brazilian grandmother, she said, stepping into blessed warmth. Portuguese and Mexican heritage. The restaurant's interior was elegant without being ostentatious, warm lighting playing off rich wood and cream-colored walls. Every table was occupied by well-dressed diners who looked up with curiosity as Luca escorted her through the main dining room. Are you sure about this? Valeria asked, suddenly aware of her bedraggled appearance among the elegant clientele. I look like I crawled out of a storm drain. You look like a woman who's had a difficult evening, Luca corrected, leading her to a private booth in a quiet corner. Nothing that can't be remedied with food, warmth and time. A server appeared immediately as if summoned by telepathy. Bring us the minestrone and fresh bread, Luca instructed, and hot tea for the lady, something caffeine-free. The server nodded and disappeared, leaving them alone in the intimate space. Valeria studied Luca's face, trying to understand why a successful businessman would show such kindness to a stranger. Why are you helping me? She asked finally. Luca considered the question, his fingers drumming once against the table, a tell that suggested the answer mattered more than casual kindness. Because some things shouldn't be tolerated in a civilized world, he said. And because... He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. Because you remind me that not everyone has forgotten how to fight for what's right. The food arrived quickly, steam rising from the bowl like an offering of comfort. Valeria realized she was starving, but she forced herself to eat slowly, to maintain some dignity despite her circumstances. Tell me about your daughter, Luca said, surprising her again. How do you know it's a daughter? Lucky guess. His smile was genuine this time, transforming his face completely. Though you have that particular glow that comes with carrying a girl. My grandmother always said they steal their mother's beauty before birth, then give it back double. She's due in 2 months, Valeria said, her hand moving instinctively to her belly. I was supposed to be married by now, supposed to have everything figured out. Instead, I'm unemployed, behind on rent, and eating charity soup from a stranger. It's not charity, Luca said firmly. It's dinner between two people who happen to meet under difficult circumstances. Right. She couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. And I'm sure you regularly rescue pregnant women from the gutter. Something flickered in his eyes, amusement mixed with something else she couldn't identify. Actually, he said, you'd be the first. The conversation flowed easier than either of them had expected. Luca found himself genuinely curious about Valeria's life, her dreams, the strength that kept her moving forward despite circumstances that would have broken lesser people. She spoke about her grandmother's stories of Brazil, her degree in early childhood education that she'd never had the chance to use properly, her hopes for her daughter's future. You never told me what you do, Valeria said, gesturing around the elegant restaurant. Besides owning this place, I oversee several business interests in Chicago, Luca replied, which was technically true if incomplete. Import, export, real estate, some consulting work. Successful businesses by the look of things. Success is relative, Luca said, his voice taking on an edge she didn't quite understand. Some achievements come with costs that aren't immediately apparent. Before Valeria could ask what he meant, a man approached their table, well-dressed, confident, but with the careful deference that suggested he worked for Luca rather than with him. Capo, the man said quietly. Romano called. The meeting tonight has been moved to the warehouse. Luca's expression didn't change, but Valeria felt rather than saw him tense. Tell Romano I'll be there within the hour. His voice carried dismissal, and the man melted away as quickly as he'd appeared. Capo? Valeria questioned. Short for Capitan, Luca said smoothly. A nickname from my military days. It was a lie, though delivered so naturally she almost believed it. But Valeria had been around enough men who bent the truth to recognize the signs. The formal way his employee had addressed him, the immediate obedience, the careful language. This wasn't military protocol. This was something else entirely. I should let you go, she said, starting to gather the coat he'd lent her. You clearly have important business to handle. The only important thing right now is making sure you get home safely. Luca signaled for the check, though Valeria noticed no money changed hands. Where do you live? Pilsen neighborhood, she said reluctantly. But I can take the bus, you don't need to. It's nearly 10 at night. You're 7 months pregnant, and Chicago buses aren't safe for anyone after dark, Luca interrupted. My driver will take you home. Really, I can't accept. You can, and you will. There was steel beneath the courtesy now, the voice of a man accustomed to having his decisions followed without argument. Then, seeing her stiffen at his tone, he softened it. Please, let me do this one thing. Valeria studied his face, trying to read the complicated emotions there. Kindness, certainly, but also something proprietary, protective in a way that should have alarmed her, but instead made her feel safer than she had in months. Okay, she said finally, but I want to pay you back for dinner. The only payment I want is your promise that you'll call me if you need anything. He handed her a business card, simple white stock with just a phone number embossed in black. Day or night, Valeria, I mean that. She took the card, their fingers brushing briefly. His hands were warm, calloused, strong enough to crush but gentle enough to offer comfort without demand. The ride to her apartment building was conducted in comfortable silence, the driver professional and discreet. When they pulled up in front of her run-down building, Luca walked her to the entrance despite her protests. Thank you, she said, handing back his coat, for everything. I don't know how to repay such kindness. You don't repay kindness, Luca replied, accepting the coat. You pass it forward when you can. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something internal. Valeria, the man tonight, Marcus. Has he bothered you before? Nothing I couldn't handle, she lied. Luca's expression suggested he saw through the lie but wouldn't push. If that changes, you call me immediately. Do you understand? There was something in his tone that made her nod without argument. I understand. Good. He waited until she was safely inside before returning to his car, but Valeria watched from her window as the expensive vehicle sat outside her building for several minutes before finally driving away. Later, lying in her narrow bed with her daughter moving restlessly in her belly, Valeria found herself thinking about Luca Castellano's hands, the way he'd looked at her as if she mattered, the careful protection he'd offered without expecting anything in return. She didn't know that 3 blocks away, Luca sat in his own car, cancelling his business meeting and instructing his security team to establish discreet surveillance on her building. or that his definition of handling Marcus Rodriguez would ensure the young man never forgot the lesson in consequences he was about to receive. Some protections were offered freely, others had to be taken. 3 days passed before Valeria saw Luca again, but his presence was felt in smaller ways. Her landlord suddenly became accommodating about her late rent, agreeing to a payment plan that shouldn't have been possible given his usual business practices. The local grocery store, where she'd been politely refused credit for weeks, suddenly approved her for a temporary account. Small mercies that felt too coincidental to be accidental. She was walking to her second job interview of the week, a position at a daycare center that paid slightly better than unemployment, when she noticed the black sedan following 2 blocks behind. The same car had been there yesterday when she'd gone to the clinic for her checkup, and the day before when she'd visited the food bank. Instead of feeling frightened, she felt oddly comforted. Someone was watching over her, and she suspected she knew who. The job interview went better than expected. The director, Mrs. Patterson, was impressed with Valeria's credentials and her obvious love for children. They were willing to work around her pregnancy, offering flexible hours and health benefits that seemed too generous for the position. "We've had excellent references for you," Mrs. Patterson mentioned as they concluded the interview. "A Mr. Castellano spoke very highly of your character and work ethic." Valeria's heart skipped. "Mr. Castellano called you?" "Yesterday. He mentioned he'd had the pleasure of meeting you and wanted to provide a reference. He spoke very warmly about your integrity and determination." Mrs. Patterson smiled. "It's rare to see someone so willing to vouch for a new acquaintance. You must have made quite an impression." Walking home with a job offer in hand, Valeria found herself torn between gratitude and concern. Luca's help was solving immediate problems, but it was also creating questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. Men in expensive suits didn't usually invest this much attention in pregnant women they'd met once, especially not men whose employees called them capo and who could make landlords suddenly cooperative with a phone call. She was so lost in thought that she almost missed the commotion outside her apartment building. Police cars, an ambulance, neighbors gathered in worried clusters. Her stomach clenched with immediate panic. "What happened?" she asked Mrs. Chen from 3B, who was standing on the sidewalk with her arms wrapped around her robe. "It was that boy who was here the other night," Mrs. Chen said, her English heavily accented but clear. "The one who was yelling at you in the hallway. Somebody beat him up real bad. Hospital bad. Marcus." Valeria's mouth went dry. "When?" "Maybe an hour ago. They found him in the alley behind the building. Broken nose, broken ribs, both hands in casts." Mrs. Chen shook her head. "Strange thing, though. He kept saying it was a misunderstanding, that he fell down some stairs. But what stairs leave marks like that?" Valeria's hands trembled as she climbed to her apartment, her mind racing. The timing was too perfect, too convenient. 3 days after Marcus had humiliated her in front of Luca's restaurant, he was found beaten badly enough to require hospitalization, but not so badly that permanent damage was done. A message, a very clear, very professional message about consequences and respect. Her phone rang as she unlocked her apartment door. The number on the display was the one from Luca's business card. "Hello, Valeria." His voice was warm, concerned. "I heard there was some trouble in your neighborhood today. Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she said, sinking into her only comfortable chair. "Though I suspect you know more about the trouble than I do." There was a pause, pregnant with implications. Sometimes people learn important lessons about treating others with respect. "Luca, did you get the job at the daycare center?" The subject change was smooth but definitive. "Yes, though I suspect you had something to do with that too. I merely provided an honest reference. You earned the position through your own qualifications." His tone was matter-of-fact. "When do you start?" "Next week. They're being very accommodating about my pregnancy." "As they should be. You're valuable, Valeria. I hope you're beginning to understand that." The word valuable settled strangely in her chest, carrying weight beyond its simple meaning. "Why are you helping me?" "Because you deserve help. Because your daughter deserves a mother who isn't constantly worried about basic survival." His voice softened. "And because I find myself caring about your well-being more than professional distance would normally allow." Professional distance. Another carefully chosen phrase that raised more questions than it answered. What profession requires professional distance from pregnant women you meet on the street? Luca's laugh was rich, genuine, one that's complicated to explain over the phone. "Have dinner with me tomorrow night and I'll answer whatever questions you're brave enough to ask." Is that wise? The words came out before she could stop them. Getting involved with someone like me when you clearly have complicated business interests? Probably not, he admitted. But wisdom and desire don't always align. Say yes, Valeria. She closed her eyes, her free hand resting on her belly, where her daughter kicked restlessly. Everything logical told her to maintain distance, to accept his help gratefully, but avoid deeper entanglement with a man whose kindness came with undercurrents of danger. But logic had never kept her warm at night, or made her feel valued when the rest of the world saw only problems and complications. Yes, she said quietly. I'll pick you up at 7. After he hung up, Valeria sat in her small apartment, listening to sirens fade in the distance and wondering what she was walking into. Outside, the black sedan had returned to its position 2 blocks away, guardian or threat depending on perspective. Her daughter kicked again as if offering an opinion on the evening's revelations. Valeria pressed her hand to the spot, whispering promises about safety and love and the difficult choices mothers made to protect their children. Tomorrow would bring answers to questions she wasn't sure she was ready to hear. But tonight, for the first time in months, she felt genuinely protected. Whatever Luca Castellano's complicated business interests were, whatever professional distance he usually maintained, she mattered to him in a way that transcended simple charity. And that feeling, dangerous as it might be, was worth the risk of getting closer to a man whose very presence seemed to reshape her world with each careful intervention. The next evening arrived with unseasonable warmth for November, as if Chicago itself was conspiring to make Valeria's decision seem less complicated than it actually was. She'd chosen her best dress, a deep burgundy wrap that accommodated her growing belly while still making her feel feminine, and waited by her window for Luca's arrival. The black sedan that pulled up was different from the one that had been watching her building. Sleeker, more expensive, with tinted windows that spoke of serious privacy concerns. When Luca emerged from the passenger side, her breath caught. In his perfectly tailored charcoal suit and silk tie, he looked like something from a different world entirely. Sophisticated, powerful, dangerous in the most attractive way possible. He came to her door personally, another small gesture that meant more than he probably realized. "You look beautiful," he said simply, helping her into the car with careful attention to her condition. "Where are we going?" Valeria asked as the driver pulled away from her neighborhood. "Somewhere we can talk privately," Luca replied, his hand finding hers on the leather seat between them. "You asked about my profession. Tonight, you'll get honest answers." The restaurant was clearly one of his establishments, though far more intimate than the place where they'd first met. A small Italian place with only 10 tables, every detail speaking of authenticity and expensive taste. The staff treated Luca with the kind of deference usually reserved for royalty, but their attention to Valeria was equally respectful. "The owner is a friend," Luca explained, as they were seated at a corner table with views of both the entrance and the kitchen. "Actually, he's my cousin's son, 3rd-generation Chicago, but his grandmother still makes the pasta sauce from scratch every morning." During dinner, Luca told her stories about his family's immigration from Sicily 3 generations ago, how they'd built legitimate businesses alongside less conventional ones, how the neighborhood had changed over the decades. His voice held genuine affection for the community, the traditions, the complex web of relationships that defined his world. "You're stalling," Valeria said finally, setting down her fork. "We've been talking for 2 hours about everything except what you actually do." Luca's smile was rueful. "Enjoying your company, and hoping that when I tell you the truth you won't run. Try me." He studied her face for a long moment, then seemed to reach a decision. "My family's businesses include legitimate enterprises, restaurants, construction, import-export operations, but we also have interests that fall outside conventional business practices. Illegal interests. Yes, no hesitation, no euphemism. We provide services that others can't or won't. We settle disputes when the courts aren't sufficient. We protect people who need protection from threats the police can't handle." Valeria felt her pulse accelerate, but not with fear, with the strange relief that came from finally understanding the undercurrents she'd been sensing. "Are you talking about organized crime?" "I'm talking about a way of life that's existed in this city for over a century," Luca corrected gently. "We have rules, codes of conduct, boundaries that we don't cross. We're not random criminals, Valeria. We're a structured organization with responsibilities to our community. And those responsibilities include beating up men who humiliate pregnant women?" Luca's expression didn't change. When necessary, yes. Marcus Rodriguez learned that actions have consequences. He wasn't seriously injured, merely educated about respect. The honesty was both refreshing and terrifying. What else should I know? That my protection of you wasn't entirely altruistic, Luca admitted, leaning forward slightly. Yes, I was genuinely appalled by his treatment of you, but I was also attracted to your strength, your dignity under pressure. I wanted to know you better, and powerful men are accustomed to removing obstacles to their desires. Am I an obstacle or a desire? Both. His voice dropped lower, more intimate. You're a complication I didn't plan for, Valeria. In my world, personal attachments are vulnerabilities. They create pressure points that enemies can exploit. But since meeting you, I find myself caring more about your well-being than strategic wisdom would recommend. Valeria absorbed this, understanding finally why he'd seemed so conflicted, why his kindness came with undercurrents of possession. So what happens now? You've invested in my life, solved my problems, and now I owe you. You owe me nothing. The words came out more forcefully than he'd intended. Every choice has been mine, has freely made, but I won't lie to you about what I want, which is, I want you in my life, not as an obligation or a debt, but as a partner, someone who understands my world, but isn't corrupted by it. He reached across the table, his fingers tracing the back of her hand. I want to provide for you and your daughter, to give you both security and opportunities you wouldn't have otherwise. I want to wake up knowing you're safe and cared for, and in return, your presence, your trust, the chance to be something more than just a crime boss when I'm with you. His honesty was brutal in its vulnerability. I'm 45 years old. Valeria, I've spent my entire adult life building power and influence, but I've never had anyone to share it with. You make me remember that accumulating control means nothing if you have no one who matters to protect. The waiter approached with dessert, but Luca waved him away with a subtle gesture. The restaurant around them had emptied except for their table, and the security personnel stationed discreetly at the exits. I need time to think, Valeria said finally. Of course, Luca signaled for the check. But while you're thinking, consider this. I can offer you and your daughter a life without financial worry, without fear, without the constant stress of survival. That's not charity or debt. That's what family provides for each other. Family, she repeated. In every sense that matters, Luca confirmed. Blood doesn't make family, Valeria. Choice does. Loyalty does. Love does. The word hung between them. Hung. Unspoken but heavy with implication. As they left the restaurant, Valeria felt the weight of a decision that would change everything. Safety and security for her daughter, but at the cost of entering a world where violence was a business tool and legal boundaries were suggestions rather than absolutes. But as Luca helped her into the car, his touch gentle and protective, she found herself wondering if love might be worth the risk of everything else. 2 weeks passed in a strange state of suspension. Luca gave her space to think, but his presence was felt in small ways. Her rent mysteriously paid ahead for 3 months, groceries appearing at her door with notes from a grateful neighbor, job opportunities that materialized just when she needed them most. Valeria started working at the daycare center, finding joy in caring for other people's children while her own daughter grew restless in her belly. The other teachers commented on her glow, the confidence that seemed to radiate from her despite her circumstances. What they didn't see were the black sedans that occasionally appeared in the neighborhood, or the way potential problems seemed to resolve themselves before they could affect her. She was leaving work on a Thursday evening when the first cramp hit. Not the gentle Braxton Hicks contractions she'd been experiencing for weeks, but something sharper, more insistent. By the time she reached her apartment building, the pain had intensified enough to make her pause on the sidewalk, one hand pressed against her belly, breathing carefully through the sensation. Mrs. Santos, her upstairs neighbor Miguel, appeared with his grocery bags. "You okay?" "Just tired," she lied, but another cramp made her gasp audibly. "That's not tired." Miguel set down his groceries, his expression concerned. "That's pain. You need a doctor." Before Valeria could protest, Miguel was on his phone calling someone in rapid Spanish. Within minutes, a black sedan pulled up. Not one of the vehicles she'd seen before, but expensive and intimidating in the same way. The driver emerged, a well-dressed man in his 30s with the alertness she'd learned to associate with Luca's people. "Mrs. Santos, Mr. Castellano sent me to check on you. Miguel called his cousin, who called someone who works for us. The network of connections that ensured her safety was more extensive than she'd realized. I don't need... Another cramp cut off her words, stronger than the others. You're getting in the car, the driver said firmly. Mr. Castellano is meeting us at the hospital. The ride to Chicago Medical Center passed in a haze of increasing discomfort. By the time they pulled up to the emergency entrance, Valeria's contractions were coming every 5 minutes. Too early, too intense for her 7.5-month pregnancy. Luca was waiting with a wheelchair and a medical team that responded to his presence with immediate efficiency. What happened? He asked, his voice tight with concern as they rushed her through the corridors. Started about an hour ago, Valeria managed between contractions. It's too soon, she's not due for another 6 weeks. Doctor, Matthews is the best obstetric specialist in the city, Luca said, keeping pace with the wheelchair. She's waiting for us upstairs. The medical team worked quickly, hooking Valeria up to monitors that revealed what she'd feared. Her daughter was in distress, the contractions threatening to trigger premature labor that could endanger both their lives. We need to stop the contractions, Dr. Matthews explained, preparing an IV. Bed rest, medication, and monitoring for the next few days at minimum. This level of stress on the body at 32 weeks could be dangerous. Stress? Valeria looked at Luca, understanding dawning. This is about my decision, isn't it? About whether to accept your protection? Luca's jaw tightened. Stress can manifest physically. You've been carrying enormous emotional and financial pressure for months. The decision about our future can wait, Dr. Matthews interrupted, administering medication through the IV. Right now, we focus on keeping this baby safely where she belongs for at least another month. Over the next few hours, as the medication slowly stopped Valeria's contractions and her daughter's heartbeat stabilized, Luca never left her side. He made phone calls in low, urgent tones that resulted in private room arrangements and round-the-clock nursing care. He coordinated with her work to ensure her job would be waiting when she recovered. He handled logistics with the efficiency of someone accustomed to solving complex problems quickly, but it was the small things that affected Valeria most. The way he adjusted her pillows without being asked, how he noticed when she was thirsty before she mentioned it, the protective way he positioned himself between her bed and the door, as if ready to defend her even in a hospital room. You don't have to stay, she said during a quiet moment when the nurses had finished their evening checks. Where else would I be? Luca replied, settling into the chair beside her bed as if he planned to spend the night there. I'm not your responsibility. No, he agreed. You're my choice. There's a difference. Dr. Matthews returned with test results and a treatment plan. Good news. The baby is stable, and we've successfully stopped the premature contractions. Bad news. You're on strict bed rest for the remainder of your pregnancy. No work, minimal physical activity, constant monitoring. Valeria's heart sank. I can't afford to be off work for 2 months. I just started this job. That's not a concern, Luca said quietly. Your financial needs are covered. I can't accept. You can and you will. His tone brooked no argument. Your daughter's health is more important than your pride. Dr. Matthews looked between them, clearly sensing the underlying tension. Mr. Castellano, could I speak with you privately? They stepped into the hallway, leaving Valeria alone with her fears and frustrations. Through the partially open door, she could hear fragments of their conversation. High-stress situation, emotional support crucial, financial security reduces cortisol levels. When they returned, Luca's expression was determined. You're coming home with me, he announced. Not negotiable. Dr. Matthews agrees that you need a stress-free environment with immediate access to medical care. You're home. My estate has a full-time medical staff and facilities that can handle any emergency. You'll have privacy, peace, and everything you need for a healthy recovery. Luca sat beside her bed, taking her hand carefully. Valeria, your daughter almost came into the world 2 months early tonight. I won't risk that happening again because you're too stubborn to accept help. The vulnerability in his voice, the genuine fear she'd seen in his eyes during the medical crisis, broke down her remaining resistance. This wasn't about control or possession. It was about protection offered from a place of caring so deep it overrode every other consideration. Okay, she whispered, but I want ground rules. This isn't permanent, and it doesn't automatically mean anything beyond medical necessity. Whatever makes you comfortable, Luca agreed, though his relief was evident. Your only job is to stay healthy and let your daughter grow safely." As they prepared for her discharge the next morning, Valeria realized she was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed, entering Luca's world completely, accepting not just his protection but his care in the most vulnerable time of her life, but watching him coordinate her medical needs with the same intensity he brought to his business affairs. She understood that some decisions were made not with logic, but with trust born from crisis. Luca's estate was nothing like Valeria had imagined. Instead of the cold, intimidating fortress she'd expected, the property felt more like a private retreat, Mediterranean architecture surrounded by gardens, guest houses scattered across landscaped grounds, and an atmosphere of quiet luxury that emphasized comfort over ostentation. Her suite occupied the entire second floor of the main house, with panoramic views of Lake Michigan and access to a private terrace where she could sit in the sun without feeling confined. A registered nurse named Eleanor checked on her twice daily, and Dr. Matthews visited weekly to monitor the baby's progress. "This is temporary," Valeria reminded herself daily, though temporary was beginning to feel increasingly permanent as her daughter thrived in the stress-free environment and her own health improved dramatically. Luca divided his time between his business obligations and ensuring her comfort, often working from the estate office so he could check on her throughout the day. Their relationship settled into a routine that felt surprisingly domestic. Shared meals, evening conversations about books from his extensive library, quiet moments when he would place his hand on her belly to feel his namesake's increasingly active kicks. "She likes music," Valeria observed one evening as they listened to classical pieces in the estate's music room. "Every time you play piano, she starts moving." "Smart girl," Luca said, his fingers moving across the keys with surprising gentleness, recognizing quality early. It was moments like these, seeing this powerful, feared man reduced to wonder by her unborn daughter's responses, that made Valeria understand how completely her life had changed. This wasn't temporary guardianship or convenient protection. This was a man falling in love with a child he hadn't fathered, but was prepared to claim as his own. The peaceful routine shattered on a Tuesday morning when Marco Vitale arrived at the estate with news that made Luca's expression go cold and dangerous. "Rodriguez is dead," Marco announced without preamble, settling into one of the office chairs where Valeria had been joining Luca for his morning coffee. Valeria's cup rattled against the saucer. "Marcus, what happened?" "Car accident," Marco said, though his tone suggested it was anything but. "Lost control on Lakeshore Drive, hit the barrier, went into the water. Very tragic." Luca's silence was more ominous than any reaction would have been. "When?" "Last night, around midnight." Marco's eyes flicked to Valeria, then back to his boss. "There's more. The girlfriend was with him. She survived. Is talking to police about threats Rodriguez had been receiving." "What kind of threats?" Valeria asked, though she suspected she already knew. "The kind that mentioned consequences for disrespecting certain people's women," Marco replied delicately. Valeria's blood ran cold. "People think Luca killed him." "People think a lot of things," Luca said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "What matters is what can be proven, and what impacts our family's safety." "Our family," Valeria repeated the words, understanding that she and her daughter had become part of whatever consequences followed. Marco continued his briefing. "The girlfriend, Jessica Walsh, here's being protective custody. She's claiming Rodriguez was terrified of retaliation, that he'd been considering leaving town." "Was he?" Luca asked. "No. He was actually planning to escalate, had been talking to some small-time dealers about causing problems for your legitimate businesses." Marco's expression darkened. The accident might have been convenient timing. "Or someone else decided Rodriguez was becoming a liability," Luca concluded. "Either way, we need to be prepared for increased attention." Over the following days, the estate's security measures intensified. More guards, stricter access protocols, and a general atmosphere of heightened alert that made Valeria realize how insulated she'd been from the realities of Luca's world. It was Elena, the nurse, who brought the most disturbing news a week later. "There was someone asking questions at the hospital," she reported during Valeria's checkup. "A woman claiming to be from Child Protective Services, wanting to know about your living situation." "CPS?" Valeria's pulse spiked dangerously. "Why would they investigate me?" Luca appeared in the doorway, having obviously heard the conversation. Because someone reported concerns about an unmarried pregnant woman living with a known crime figure. The implication hit Valeria like a physical blow. They could take my daughter. Over my dead body, Luca said quietly, but with such absolute conviction that both women believed him. Elena, what exactly did this person ask? Questions about Miss Santos's mental state, her financial dependency, whether she appeared to be under coercion. Elena's professional demeanor couldn't hide her concern. I told her patient confidentiality prevented any discussion, but she seemed to know quite a bit already. Someone's building a case, Luca concluded. Marco suspected this might happen after Rodriguez's death. Too convenient to remove the ex-boyfriend and then have the authorities question her fitness as a mother. Who would do that? Valeria asked, though she was beginning to understand the answer. Someone who wants to put pressure on me, Luca replied. Taking your daughter would be the ultimate leverage. I'd have to choose between protecting my organization and protecting you both. The room fell silent as the implications settled. Valeria's peaceful recovery period was over. The outside world had found them, and the consequences of loving a man like Luca Castellano were about to become very real. What do we do? She asked. Luca's expression was grim but determined. We make it official. You can't be investigated as a single mother in a compromising situation if you're not single. You're talking about marriage. I'm talking about protection. Luca moved to her side, taking her hands carefully. Legal protection, social protection, financial protection. Marriage would give me legal standing to defend our family against anyone who tries to separate us. Fake marriage. Real marriage, Luca corrected. Real commitment, real protection, real partnership. The feelings between us are already there. Valeria, this just makes them legally recognized. Outside, storm clouds gathered over Lake Michigan, reflecting the turbulence that was about to engulf their carefully constructed peace. Valeria realized that her decision could no longer be delayed. The choice between independence and protection had become a choice between her daughter's safety and her own fears about entering Luca's dangerous world. But as she felt her daughter kick restlessly against her ribs, as if sensing the tension in the room, Valeria understood that some decisions were made not with the heart or the head, but with the fierce protectiveness that defined motherhood. The wedding took place 3 days later in the estate's gardens, under circumstances that should have been romantic, but felt more like a strategic defense against forces neither of them could fully control. Dr. Matthews had approved the minimal stress of a simple ceremony, and Elena stood by with monitoring equipment disguised among the flower arrangements. Valeria wore a cream-colored dress that accommodated her 8-month belly, her hair styled simply but elegantly. Luca looked devastating in his dark suit, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings even during their vows. The guests were limited to Marco, Elena, and a handful of Luca's most trusted associates. The officiant was a judge who owed Luca favors dating back decades, ensuring the ceremony's legality without unwanted publicity. Do you, Luca Michael Castellano, take Valeria Santos to be your lawfully wedded wife, to love, honor, and protect, and, for better or worse, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, till death do you part? I do. Luca's voice was steady, his eyes never leaving Valeria's face. Do you, Valeria Santos, take Luca Michael Castellano to be your lawfully wedded husband, to love, honor, and cherish for better or worse, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, till death do you part? Valeria hesitated for just a moment, understanding that this answer would change everything forever. Then she thought about her daughter's safety, about the man who had shown her kindness when she had nothing to offer in return, about the protection she could provide her child by accepting this unusual love story. I do. The kiss was gentle, careful of her condition, but carrying promises that went far beyond the ceremony's strategic necessities. For a moment, surrounded by gardens and security, and the weight of their complicated circumstances, it felt like the beginning of something beautiful, rather than a legal maneuver against unseen enemies. The illusion lasted exactly 48 hours. Valeria was resting in the estate's sunroom, reading to her unborn daughter from a collection of children's stories, when Elena burst through the doors with uncharacteristic urgency. Mrs. Castellano, the title still felt foreign, we need to get you to the safe room immediately. What's happening? Federal agents at the gate. Search warrants. Mr. Castellano's attorney is trying to delay them, but they have documentation suggesting this property is connected to money laundering operations. Valeria's blood chilled. The safe room was a reinforced space in the estate's basement, designed to protect against everything from home invasions to federal raids. She'd seen it during her initial tour, but never imagined she'd need to use it. "Where's Luca?" "Handling the situation," Elena said, helping Valeria to her feet. But he was very clear. "Your safety and the baby's welfare come first." The safe room was more comfortable than Valeria had expected, with communications equipment, medical supplies, and enough provisions for several days if necessary. Elena stayed with her, monitoring both her stress levels and the baby's response to the crisis. Through the secure communication system, they could hear fragments of what was happening above. Agents searching the house, Luca's lawyer demanding to see specific warrants, Marco coordinating with other family members to ensure their legal exposure was minimized. "Why now?" Valeria asked Elena. "Right after we got married." "Timing's not coincidental," Elena replied, checking Valeria's blood pressure. "Someone wanted maximum pressure at your most vulnerable moment." Hours passed in tense waiting. Finally, the all-clear signal came through the communication system. The federal agents had completed their search without finding evidence to support their warrants. They'd left with warnings about ongoing investigations, but no arrests had been made. Luca came to get them personally, his face grim, but his relief obvious when he saw Valeria was unharmed. "How are you feeling? Any contractions?" "I'm fine. The baby's fine." Valeria studied his expression, reading the fury he was working to control. "But something's changed." "We're leaving," Luca announced. "Tonight, this property is compromised and staying here puts all of us at risk." "Leaving for where?" "Somewhere safe. Somewhere they can't find us until after your daughter is born, and we can deal with this properly." Luca helped her up the stairs, Eleanor following with monitoring equipment. "Packlight. Everything else can be replaced." As they prepared to abandon the estate that had become their temporary sanctuary, Valeria realized that her peaceful recovery period was definitively over. Whatever forces had been building pressure against Luca's organization were now targeting her directly, using her pregnancy and their new marriage as leverage points. But watching Luca coordinate their escape with the same protective intensity he'd shown from their first meeting, she understood something crucial. This man would sacrifice everything, his businesses, his territory, his power, before he'd let anything happen to her or their daughter. The question was whether love and protection would be enough against enemies who were willing to use federal law enforcement as their weapon of choice. The safe house was a sprawling ranch property 2 hours outside Chicago, tucked away in forest that provided both privacy and strategic advantages for anyone who understood such things. Luca had owned it for years but never lived there. It was designed for exactly this kind of emergency relocation. Dr. Matthews made the journey with them, along with Elena, and enough medical equipment to handle any complications. Within hours, they'd established a temporary medical facility that could manage Valeria's delivery if necessary. "Who's doing this?" Valeria asked on their third night at the safe house, when her restlessness had made sleep impossible despite her advancing pregnancy. Luca looked up from the intelligence reports Marco had delivered that afternoon. "Someone with resources, federal connections, and detailed knowledge of our operations. Someone inside your organization? Possibly. Or someone with access to information that should have been secure." Luca set down the papers, moving to sit beside her on the bed. "What matters is protecting you until we can identify and neutralize the threat. And after that, we can't hide here forever." Luca was quiet for a moment, his hand settling protectively over her belly where their daughter, he'd started thinking of the baby as theirs completely, was moving with increasing urgency as her due date approached. "After that," he said finally, "we make some changes. Legitimate businesses only. No more operations that give federal prosecutors ammunition. A quieter life." Valeria stared at him. "You'd give up everything you've built?" "I'd give up everything that puts you and her at risk." His voice carried absolute conviction. "Power means nothing if you can't protect the people you love." The conversation was interrupted by Marco's urgent arrival. "Boss, we have a problem. Actually, we have an answer and a problem." "Start with the answer," Luca said. "The pressure's coming from Victor Romano, federal judge, completely clean reputation, has been building cases against organized crime for decades." Marco's expression was grim. Turns out his daughter Isabella disappeared from her wedding 5 years ago, allegedly kidnapped by Dominic Cavallaro. Cavallaro. Luca's expression darkened. I thought that family was finished after the federal trials. They are. But Romano blames all of us for what happened to his daughter. He's been systematically targeting every major family in Chicago, using his federal connections to build cases that destroy our operations from within. And the problem? He knows about this location. Federal units are 20 minutes out. The next hour passed in controlled chaos. Medical equipment packed, vehicles loaded, escape routes confirmed. Dr. Matthews made the decision that Valeria was stable enough for transport, but barely. They were loading the last of the medical supplies when Valeria doubled over with a contraction that was unmistakably different from anything she'd experienced before. That's not Braxton Hicks, Dr. Matthews said immediately, checking her watch. Elena, set up monitoring equipment now. We don't have 20 minutes, Marco reported from his position at the communication station. Federal convoy just turned onto the access road. Then we make our stand here, Luca decided, his voice taking on the cold authority his enemies had learned to fear. Marco, defensive positions. Elena, you and Dr. Matthews get Valeria to the most secure room and prepare for immediate delivery. Luca, Valeria began. I'm not leaving you, he said firmly, helping her toward the house's interior. But I'm also not letting them take our daughter. The federal agents arrived as Valeria's labor intensified beyond any possibility of delaying delivery. Through the safe house's reinforced windows, they could see vehicles surrounding the property, agents taking positions that suggested they were prepared for a siege. Luca Castellano, a voice amplified through speakers echoed across the property. This is Agent Sarah Morrison, FBI. We have warrants for your arrest and search warrants for this property. Surrender yourself and any individuals inside, and no one will be harmed. Counteroffer, Luca called back through the communication system he'd had installed for exactly such situations. My wife is in active labor with complications that require immediate medical attention. You have two choices. Withdraw until the birth is complete and allow our medical team to work safely, or explain to your supervisors why federal agents interfered with an emergency childbirth. From the medical room, Valeria could hear the negotiations continuing as her contractions intensified. Dr. Matthews worked with professional calm, but Elena's worried glances toward the windows revealed how precarious their situation had become. Push, Valeria, Dr. Matthews instructed during a momentary lull in the standoff outside. Your daughter's decided she doesn't want to wait for better timing. 20 minutes later, as federal agents maintained their siege positions and Luca coordinated defensive measures from the hallway outside, Lucia Santos Castellano entered the world with a furious cry that cut through every other sound on the property. She's perfect, Dr. Matthews announced, placing the baby on Valeria's chest. Completely healthy, excellent breathing response, good coloring. Luca appeared in the doorway, his weapon set aside, his entire being focused on the woman and child who had just transformed his understanding of what mattered most in life. My girls, he said quietly, approaching carefully. Both of you safe. Both safe, Valeria confirmed, exhaustion and euphoria combining in her voice. Luca, meet your daughter. He took the baby with surprising gentleness, for hands that had dealt with life and death decisions for decades, his expression soft with wonder that had nothing to do with power or control. Outside, Agent Morrison's voice returned. Mr. Castellano, we're aware that a birth has just taken place. Medical personnel are standing by if needed, but our warrants remain valid. Then let's go settle this, Luca said, kissing Valeria's forehead before passing their daughter back to her. Time to end Romano's war. What happened next entered Chicago crime legend. Luca Castellano walked out of that safe house, carrying a newborn baby and a folder of documents that would change everything. Agent Morrison, he called out, I have an offer that I think your supervisors will find very interesting. 5 years' worth of evidence about judicial corruption involving federal judge Victor Romano. Financial records, recorded conversations, documented case fixing that goes back to his daughter's disappearance. And in exchange, immunity for my family, witness protection for my wife and daughter, and the end of his vendetta against people who had nothing to do with Isabella Romano's choices. 6 months later, Valeria sat in their new home in Napa Valley, watching Luca teach 6-month-old Lucia to clap her hands, while former federal judge Victor Romano began serving a life sentence for corruption, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy charges. The man who had once commanded fear throughout Chicago's underworld now spent his mornings making baby bottles and his afternoons managing the vineyard they'd purchased with the proceeds from his legitimized business interests. "Any regrets?" Valeria asked as they watched their daughter discover the fascinating properties of falling leaves. "Just one," Luca replied, settling beside them on the blanket they'd spread under the oak trees. "I regret not finding you sooner." Lucia gurgled happily, reaching for her father's face with the complete trust that only children possess. In her eyes, he wasn't a former crime boss or a man with a dangerous past. He was simply the person who protected her, provided for her, and loved her mother with the kind of devotion that created safety in an uncertain world. Sometimes the most powerful transformations come not from strategic planning or careful calculation, but from the simple decision to choose love over fear, family over power, and the future over the past. Their love story had begun with muddy water and humiliation, but it had become something beautiful. Proof that even the most complicated hearts can find their way home when they find the right person to protect.